the blood soaked through his shirt in a crimson stain that spread wider with each labored breath. And Xander Kincaid knew if he didn't find help soon, this god-forsaken stretch of Nevada rangeland would become his grave. His horse had thrown him 3 miles back when a rattlesnake spooked the animal near a rocky outcropping. The fall itself hadn't been the problem. Xander had taken worse tumbles in his 26 years of cowboy life. But when he'd landed hard on his side, a jagged piece of sun-bleached wood from an old fence post had punctured clean through his ribs. He'd pulled himself free, leaving the wood embedded in the earth along with a good portion of his blood, and started walking. His horse had bolted for home, which meant the ranch hands at the Triple Star wouldn't even know to look for him until nightfall at the earliest. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the Nevada desert in 1882, turning the air into shimmering waves of heat. Xander pressed his hand harder against his side, feeling the warm wetness seep between his fingers. His vision blurred at the edges, and he stumbled over a clump of sagebrush. He'd been riding fence line for the Triple Star Ranch, checking for breaks and marking spots that needed repair. Solitary work, which was how he preferred it most days. Now that preference might cost him his life. He crested a small rise and saw something that made him think the blood loss had him hallucinating. A wagon sat in the shade of a cluster of cottonwood trees near a narrow creek bed, and beside it stood a woman hanging laundry on a rope stretched between 2 branches. She wore a simple calico dress the color of morning sky, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. As Xander watched, she reached into a basket and shook out a white sheet, sending droplets of water sparkling in the sunlight. He tried to call out, but his voice came as barely more than a croak. His legs felt like they were made of sand, and the ground suddenly tilted at an impossible angle. Xander fell to his knees, then forward onto his hands. The woman looked up at the sound of his collapse. For a moment she froze, a wet pillowcase clutched in her hands. Then she dropped everything and ran toward him. "Sir! Oh my lord, you're hurt!" Her voice reached him as if from a great distance. Xander tried to speak, to tell her about the fence post, about the blood he was losing, but darkness crept in from the corners of his vision. He felt gentle hands on his shoulders, heard her calling to him with increasing urgency, and then he knew nothing at all. Consciousness returned slowly, in fragments of sensation. Softness beneath him, cool wetness on his forehead, pain, sharp and insistent, in his left side, and a voice, low and soothing, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. Xander forced his eyes open and found himself staring up at a canvas wagon cover stretched overhead. The light filtering through was softer now, suggesting late afternoon or early evening. "Easy now, don't try to move too quick." The voice belonged to the woman from the creek, and as his vision focused, Xander got his first clear look at her. She had a heart-shaped face with warm brown eyes that held genuine concern. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, with sun-kissed skin that spoke of outdoor work. A few dark curls had escaped her bun to frame her face. "You've lost a lot of blood. I've cleaned and bandaged the wound, but you need to stay still." Xander tried to sit up anyway, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his torso. The woman placed a firm hand on his shoulder, pressing him back down with surprising strength. "I said stay still. You're lucky that piece of wood didn't puncture anything vital, but you've got a nasty gash that needed stitching. I'm no doctor, but my mother taught me field medicine before she passed." "Where am I?" Xander managed, his voice rough as sandpaper. "You're in my wagon, about half a mile from where you collapsed. Took me near 2 hours to drag you here on a blanket, and you're not a small man." She reached for a tin cup and held it to his lips. "Drink this. It's willow bark tea for the pain." The tea tasted bitter, but Xander drank it gratefully, suddenly aware of how parched his throat felt. "My horse threw me," he said when she pulled the cup away. "Landed on an old fence post. I work for the Triple Star Ranch. They'll be looking for me." "Triple Star is a good 20 miles east of here," the woman said, settling back on her heels. "I'm camped here while I make my way to Empire City. Name's Tessa Abbott, but most people call me Tessa." Xander Kincaid. He studied her more carefully now. The wagon was modest but well-maintained, packed with supplies and household goods covered with canvas sheets. A single horse was hobbled near the creek, grazing peacefully. "You're traveling alone?" A shadow crossed Tessa's face. "I am now. My father passed 3 months ago back in California. He'd planned for us to start fresh in Nevada, bought a small property near Empire City sight unseen. I decided to honor his dream. She stood and moved to a small traveling stove. You should eat something if you can keep it down. I've got stew. Over the next hour, as the desert sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo, Xander learned Tessa Abbott's story. Her mother had died when Tessa was 16, leaving her and her father to manage their small farm outside Sacramento. They'd struggled for years with drought and debt until her father got word of cheap land available near the growing mining town of Empire City. He'd sold everything, bought a wagon and supplies, and they'd set out together. Then fever took him just outside the California border. Tessa had buried him near the Truckee River and continued alone, determined not to let his dream die with him. Most would have turned back, Xander said, accepting another cup of water from her. The willow bark tea had dulled the worst of the pain, but he felt weak as a newborn calf. And go back to what? Tessa stirred the pot on her stove, not meeting his eyes. There was nothing left in California but memories and debt. At least in Empire City I'll have the land. And Father said the property has a cabin on it. I can make something of myself there. It's dangerous for a woman alone out here. Now she did look at him, and her eyes flashed with something between annoyance and amusement. I noticed. I've also noticed that I'm the one who saved your life today, so perhaps we should reconsider who's dangerous and who needs protecting. Despite the pain, Xander felt a smile tug at his lips. Fair point, Miss Abbott. It's Tessa, and you need to rest. That wound is going to hurt something fierce for days, and you've got a long recovery ahead. She ladled stew into a tin bowl and brought it to him. I'll get word to your ranch tomorrow. There's a homestead about 5 miles north. Hopefully they can send a rider. Xander ate slowly, his appetite returning with each bite of the hearty stew. Tessa had skill with cooking, flavoring the simple meal with herbs she must have gathered along the trail. As he ate, he watched her move about the small camp with practiced efficiency, cleaning up from the day, checking her horse, banking the fire for the night. She moved with a natural grace that came from hard work, not affected refinement. When she caught him watching, she raised an eyebrow. Something wrong with the stew? No, it's good, real good. I was just thinking you've got more grit than most men I know. My father used to say that living taught you more than any school ever could. She poured herself some coffee from the pot she'd kept warm at the edge of the fire. He also said that waiting for someone to save you was a fool's game. You save yourself, or you don't get saved at all. Seems I'm the exception to that rule today. Tessa's expression softened. Today you needed help. Tomorrow maybe you won't. That's just how life works in this country. She took a sip of her coffee, then asked, Do you have family? Anyone who'll be worried besides your employers? No family left. My parents died of cholera when I was 14. Been working ranches ever since, drifting mostly until I landed at the Triple Star 2 years back. Xander shifted slightly, testing the limits of his injury. The pain flared but seemed manageable. The foreman's a decent man. He'll organize a search come morning when my horse shows up without me. Then we'll make sure they can find you. I'll hang your shirt from the tallest cottonwood like a flag. She gestured to where his ruined shirt hung drying, the bloodstains now faded to rust brown. I did my best to clean it, but I think it's beyond saving. The night settled around them with that particular quiet of the desert, broken only by the occasional call of a nighthawk or the soft sound of the creek. Tessa banked the fire low and spread her bedroll on the ground near the wagon, insisting Xander keep the wagon bed with its mattress of folded blankets. He wanted to argue but knew he didn't have the strength. As he drifted towards sleep, he heard her voice soft in the darkness. Xander, you still awake? Barely. I'm glad I found you. Glad you're going to be all right. He wanted to respond, to tell her that he was glad too, that finding her might have been the luckiest moment of his life, even counting the nearly dying part. But sleep pulled him under before he could form the words. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only high desert country could produce. Xander woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment he forgot where he was. The pain in his side reminded him quickly enough. He carefully pushed himself up to sitting, gritting his teeth against the discomfort. Tessa appeared at the back of the wagon, holding a steaming mug. I heard you moving around. How's the pain? I've had worse, he lied. You're a terrible liar. She handed him the coffee and studied his face with a critical eye. Your color's better, though. That's a good sign. Let me check the bandage after you've had some coffee and food." Xander discovered he was ravenous, and Tessa's simple breakfast of bacon, beans, and hard bread tasted like a feast. After he'd eaten, she changed his bandage with gentle efficiency, and he could see her handiwork from the night before. The stitches were small and even, the wound cleaned and properly dressed. The gash was about 5 inches long, following the line of his ribs, angry and red, but showing no signs of infection. "You've got a real skill for this," Xander said, as she wrapped fresh strips of cloth around his torso. "My mother was the one with the skill. She doctored half the families in our valley before the consumption took her. I just remembered what she taught me." Tessa tied off the bandage and helped him ease back against the wagon side. "I'm going to ride north this morning, find that homestead, and send word to your ranch. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" "I'll be fine. Not much trouble I can get into lying in a wagon." She gave him a look that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she packed a small bag and saddled her horse anyway. Before she left, she positioned a canteen and some bread within his reach, and made him promise not to try walking around. Xander watched her ride north, sitting straight in the saddle with the confidence of someone who'd been riding since childhood. Alone with his thoughts, Xander found himself dwelling on Tessa Abbott in a way that surprised him. He'd known plenty of women in his years, had even fancied himself in love a time or two, but there was something different about Tessa. Maybe it was the way she'd taken charge of an emergency without hesitation, or the quiet strength in how she spoke about honoring her father's dream. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the warmth in her brown eyes when she'd told him she was glad he'd be all right. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, the sun was directly overhead and voices were approaching. Tessa returned with a grizzled old homesteader named Jack Morris, who took one look at Xander's injury and whistled low. "That's a nasty piece of work, son. You're lucky this young lady found you. I'll send my boy to the Triple Star right away. They'll probably send a wagon for you by tomorrow." "I'm obliged, sir." Morris tipped his hat to Tessa. "You did fine work patching him up, Miss Abbott. My wife says if you need anything while you're passing through, you're welcome to stop by our place. We're always glad to help a fellow traveler." After Morris left, Tessa unhitched her horse and set about preparing a midday meal. Xander noticed she kept glancing at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Finally, he asked, "Something on your mind?" "Mr. Morris invited me to stay at their homestead until your people come for you. Said it wasn't proper for me to be camped alone with a man, even an injured one." She stirred a pot of rice, not looking at him. "I told him I appreciated the concern, but I'd be staying here to make sure your wound didn't fester. He seemed to think that was scandalous." "Was he right about the scandal?" "I don't much care what people think about propriety when there's a life at stake." Now she did look at him, and there was steel in her gaze. "Besides, I've learned that people who talk loudest about propriety are usually the ones doing the least good in the world. My father taught me to judge actions, not appearances." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. I wish you could have met him. He would have liked you, I think." A sad smile crossed her face. "He always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. You thanked me even when you were half dead with blood loss. That says something about character." They fell into an easy rhythm over the rest of the day. Tessa tended her camp duties while checking on Xander regularly, bringing him water and food, changing his bandage again in the evening. They talked about everything and nothing. The beauty of the Nevada landscape, the challenges of ranch life, the dreams they'd each harbored growing up. Xander found himself opening up in ways he rarely did, telling her about the loneliness of cowboy life, the constant moving, the sense of never quite belonging anywhere. "Maybe you haven't found your place yet," Tessa suggested, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. "My father used to say that home isn't where you're born, it's where you decide to grow roots." "And you think Empire City is where you'll grow yours?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to try." She poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling upward into the darkening sky. "What about you? Is the Triple Star where you plan to stay?" Xander considered the question. Before yesterday, he would have said yes without hesitation. The Triple Star was steady work, decent pay, and a foreman who treated his men fairly. But something had shifted in the past day and a half, and he found himself uncertain about a future that had seemed perfectly clear before. "I suppose I never thought that far ahead. Cowboys don't tend to, as a rule." We think in seasons, not years. That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is, he admitted, and the honesty of it surprised him. It surely is. That night, Xander dreamed of dark eyes and gentle hands, of a woman with enough strength to drag a wounded man half a mile through desert heat, enough courage to continue a journey alone that had been meant for two. He woke in the darkness to find Tessa checking on him, her face illuminated by moonlight. "Sorry," she whispered. "I wanted to make sure you weren't feverish. Go back to sleep." But he caught her hand before she could pull away. "Tessa, wait. I just want to say thank you, properly. You saved my life, and I don't take that lightly." In the moonlight, he could see her expression soften. "You don't need to thank me, Xander. I just did what anyone would do." "No, not anyone. You did what someone brave and good would do." "There's a difference." She squeezed his hand once, gently, then pulled away. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be another hot day, and you need your strength." The wagon from the Triple Star arrived late the following afternoon, driven by Tom Harrison, the foreman himself, with two ranch hands riding alongside. Harrison was a stocky man in his 50s, with sun-weathered skin and shrewd blue eyes. He took one look at Xander's bandaged torso and shook his head. "Boy, when you get yourself into trouble, you don't do it halfway, do you?" But there was relief in his voice. "We've been searching since yesterday morning when your horse came back with blood on the saddle. I'm sorry for the worry, boss. Wasn't planning on getting skewered by a fence post." Harrison's attention shifted to Tessa, who stood a respectful distance away. "Miss, I understand you're the one who patched up this fool Cowboy. The homesteader we talked to said you did real professional work." "I did what I could, sir. He needs proper rest and clean bandages changed daily. The wound should be watched for infection." "I'll make sure of it." Harrison pulled out a small leather pouch and held it toward Tessa. "This is for your trouble and for saving one of my best men." But Tessa stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't want payment for doing the right thing. Your man needed help. I helped him. That's the end of it." Harrison looked taken aback. "Miss, it's only proper. Proper or not, I won't take money for it. But I thank you for the offer." As the ranch hands carefully helped Xander into the back of the wagon, arranging blankets to make him comfortable, he found himself desperate not to let Tessa simply disappear from his life. "Miss Abbott, how far to Empire City from here?" "The homesteader said about 30 miles. I should reach it in 2 more days if the weather holds." "Empire City's not far from the ranch?" Harrison interjected. "Maybe 12 miles. We take cattle there for sale sometimes." Xander met Tessa's eyes. "Maybe once I'm healed up, I could come by Empire City. See how you're settling in, make sure you don't need anything." Something flickered across her face, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just cautious interest. "I'd like that. The property is supposed to be on the north edge of town, near Willow Creek. Ask anyone in town for the old Hanson place. That's what the deed says." "I'll find it," Xander promised. "You can count on that." As the wagon pulled away, Xander twisted around despite the pain to watch Tessa standing beside her camp, one hand raised in farewell. She looked small and solitary against the vast backdrop of desert and sky, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. He kept watching until the wagon rounded a bend and she disappeared from view. "That's a good woman," Harrison said from the driver's seat. "Strong and capable. Not many women would have the grit to doctor a stranger and then refuse payment for it." "She's traveling alone to start a new life in Empire City," Xander said, still looking back even though there was nothing to see now but empty road. "Her father died along the way." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard road she's chosen. I hope she makes it work." "She will," Xander said with certainty he felt in his bones. "She's got the kind of strength that doesn't quit." The ride back to the Triple Star took 3 hours, and every jolt sent pain shooting through Xander's side. By the time they arrived at the ranch, he was gritting his teeth and sweating despite the cooling evening air. Harrison had him carried straight to the bunkhouse, where the ranch cook, an older Chinese man named Wei, took one look at the injury and nodded approvingly. "Good stitching. Woman who did this knew what she was doing. You rest now, heal proper." Over the next week, Xander followed orders and rested, though it went against every instinct he had. Cowboys weren't built for lying around, and the forced inactivity drove him half crazy. But Wei was a strict nurse, checking the wound daily and forcing bitter herbal drinks on him that he swore would speed healing. The other ranch hands stopped by with books borrowed from Harrison's small library, with gossip from the bunkhouse, with anything to keep him from dying of boredom. Through it all, Xander thought about Tessa. He wondered if she'd made it safely to Empire City, if the cabin on her property was livable, if she had supplies enough to last until she could establish herself. He thought about the way she'd moved around her camp with quiet efficiency, the warmth in her voice when she spoke about her father, the steel in her spine when she'd refused Harrison's payment. He thought about her more than was probably wise for a man who'd known her less than 2 days. 10 days after the accident, Way declared the wound healed enough for light work, though he forbade any heavy lifting or riding for at least another week. Xander convinced Harrison to let him help with equipment maintenance in the barn, simple tasks that kept him busy without straining his injury. But his thoughts kept drifting to Empire City, to a small cabin on the north edge of town, where a dark-haired woman with warm brown eyes was building a new life. 2 weeks after his injury, Xander was cleared for regular duty. His first ride was a short one, just checking the nearby pastures, but it felt like freedom after so long afoot. The wound had healed to a pink scar, tender still, but no longer limiting his movement. That evening, he approached Harrison in the ranch office. "Boss, I was hoping I could take a day to ride into Empire City. I'd like to check on Miss Abbott, make sure she's settling in all right." Harrison looked up from the ledger he was working on, and Xander could have sworn he saw a knowing glint in the older man's eyes. "Miss Abbott made quite an impression on you. She saved my life. Seems right to make sure she's doing all right." "She did save your life, and the Triple Star owes her for that." Harrison pulled out a piece of paper and scribbled on it. "You take her this note. It's good for credit at Patterson's General Store in Empire City. Tell Patterson to build a ranch. Consider it proper payment since the lady wouldn't take cash." "She might not accept this either, boss." "Then you'll have to be persuasive. You've got tomorrow off and the day after if you need it. Just don't do anything foolish with that wound. Way will have my hide if you come back injured." Xander left before dawn the next morning, riding a steady gelding named Copper through the cool pre-dawn darkness. The 12 miles to Empire City passed slowly, giving him too much time to think, to wonder if Tessa would even want to see him. Maybe she'd just been kind to an injured stranger. Maybe he was reading too much into warm eyes and gentle touches, that had simply been the actions of a decent person helping someone in need. Empire City emerged from the morning haze as the sun climbed higher. It was a typical Nevada boomtown, built around silver mining, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings and side streets spreading out in a rough grid. The town was larger than Xander had expected, probably 2,000 people or more, with the constant noise of mining operations echoing from the hills to the east. He stopped at Patterson's General Store first, a well-stocked establishment that seemed to carry everything from mining equipment to ladies' dress fabric. The proprietor, a thin man with wire spectacles, looked at Harrison's note and nodded. "The Triple Star's credit is always good here. You looking to make a purchase?" "Not today, sir. I'm actually looking for Miss Tessa Abbott. I understand she's taken over the old Hanson place north of town." Patterson's expression shifted to something between sympathy and concern. "Ah, yes, Miss Abbott. She's been in here a few times for supplies. Brave woman, taking on that property alone. The cabin's in rough shape, I'm afraid. Old Hanson died 3 years back, and the place has been empty since. It's about 2 miles north on the Creek Road. You'll see a stand of willows and a broken gate. Can't miss it." Xander thanked him and rode north out of town, following a rutted track that paralleled a narrow creek. He found the property exactly as Patterson had described, a broken gate hanging from one hinge, a rough yard overgrown with weeds, and beyond it a small cabin that had seen much better days. Part of the roof had a tarp stretched over it, and one of the windows was covered with boards, but smoke rose from the stone chimney, and he could see that someone had been working to clear the yard. He dismounted and tied Copper to the fence, then walked toward the cabin. Before he reached the door, it swung open and Tessa stepped out, a bucket in her hand. She froze when she saw him, her eyes going wide. "Xander?" "Hello, Tessa." He pulled off his hat, suddenly nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check on you, see how you were settling in." For a moment she just stared at him, then a smile broke across her face like sunrise, transforming her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "You came. I didn't think you really would." "I said I would." People say a lot of things they don't mean. She set down the bucket and walked toward him, and he could see she wore a simple work dress covered by a canvas apron, both showing signs of hard use. Her hair was tied back with a scrap of cloth, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looked perfect. "How's your side? Has it healed proper?" "Good as new, thanks to you." He gestured at the cabin and the cleared yard. "Looks like you've been busy." "Busy doesn't begin to cover it," she laughed, but there was weariness behind it. The cabin needed more work than I expected. The roof had a hole, the stovepipe was clogged, and something had been living in the corners, probably raccoons or possums. But I'm making progress. She glanced at the bucket she'd set down. "I was just going to fetch water from the creek. Would you like to come in? I've got coffee on." The cabin's interior was sparse, but showed signs of Tessa's efforts to make it livable. The floor had been swept clean, the windows that weren't boarded up sparkled with sunlight, and her few possessions were neatly arranged. A small table and 2 chairs occupied one corner, a narrow bed another. The stone fireplace was clearly old, but had been cleaned out and was functioning, with a coffee pot hanging over a small fire. "It's not much yet," Tessa said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "But it's mine, and it's a start. It's more than a lot of people have." Xander accepted the coffee and sat at the table. "Tessa, I brought something from my boss. He wanted you to have proper payment for saving my life, but he figured you wouldn't take cash, so he arranged this instead." He pulled out Harrison's note and explained the credit at Patterson's store. As he'd expected, Tessa's expression turned stubborn. "I already told your boss I didn't want payment." "I know, but think of it practically. You need supplies to fix this place up, don't you? Nails, maybe some proper roofing material, glass for that window. This isn't charity, Tessa. It's a debt owed. You saved the life of one of Harrison's best workers." He grinned. "His words, not mine." She took the note reluctantly, studying it. "This is too much. It's what you're owed. Besides, I'm supposed to be persuasive about this. Harrison said if I came back without you accepting, he'd be disappointed." "Persuasive, are you?" But he could see her weakening, practicality warring with pride. Finally, she folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. "All right, but only because I do need supplies, and I'm not too proud to accept payment for services rendered, though I still say helping someone who's hurt is just basic human decency." "Maybe, but basic human decency is rarer than it ought to be." Xander sipped his coffee, looking around the cabin. "What can I help with while I'm here? I've got today and tomorrow off, and I'm handy with repairs." "You came all this way to check on me, and now you want to work?" Tessa shook her head, but she was smiling. "That wound of yours is barely healed." "The wound is fine, and I wouldn't have offered if I couldn't follow through." "What needs doing?" What followed were 2 of the most satisfying days Xander could remember in years. He patched the roof properly, replacing the rotted boards and shingles that Tessa hadn't been able to reach safely. He fixed the broken window, riding back to Empire City with her wagon to purchase glass and supplies using Harrison's credit. He repaired the gate and reinforced the cabin door, which had been hanging loose on its hinges. And through it all, they talked. Tessa told him about her mother's herb garden in California, about learning to read by candlelight because her father believed education was important even for daughters, about the pain of watching fever take her father despite everything she'd learned about nursing. Xander told her about growing up the son of shopkeepers in St. Louis, about the cholera epidemic that had taken his parents and left him orphaned, about learning cowboy work from a tough but fair ranch hand named Miguel, who'd seen something worth saving in a scrawny 14-year-old boy. On the second evening, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sun set over the western mountains, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. Tessa had made dinner, a simple stew that reminded him of that first meal she'd fed him when he was wounded. It tasted like home in a way that made his chest ache. "You've done so much to help," Tessa said quietly. "I can't thank you enough." "You saved my life. Some roof repair and a new window hardly balances that scale." "Maybe not, but it means a lot to me. I've been alone since my father died, and I didn't realize how much I missed having someone to talk to work alongside." She turned to look at him, her face serious in the fading light. "Will you come back? After you leave tomorrow, I mean. Will I see you again? Do you want to see me again?" "I do, very much." Xander felt something settle in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Then I'll come back. Empire City's not far from the ranch. I can ride over on my days off, help with whatever work needs doing, if that's all right with you." "It's more than all right." She smiled. And in that moment, Xander knew with absolute certainty that Tessa Abbott had become the most important person in his world. "Just promise me you'll be careful riding the range. No more fence post accidents." "I promise. Though getting injured did lead me to you, so I can't entirely regret it." "That's the worst logic I've ever heard." "Maybe, but it's true." He left the next morning with Tessa's smile as his last sight of the cabin, and it sustained him through the ride back to the Triple Star. Harrison took one look at his face and shook his head with a knowing expression. "That good, was it?" "Better," Xander admitted. "Boss, I'd like to request every third Sunday off if it can be managed. I want to court Miss Abbott properly, and that takes time." "Court her properly, huh? Well, I suppose the Triple Star can spare you one Sunday in 3, but I expect full work the rest of the time." "You'll get it, sir. I promise." And he kept that promise through the late summer and into fall. Every third Sunday, and sometimes during the week if work allowed, Xander rode to the cabin by Willow Creek. He brought supplies, tools, sometimes gifts. A book of poetry he'd bought in Empire City, a warm shawl for the coming winter, fresh meat from the ranch. In return, Tessa fed him meals that tasted better than anything he'd eaten in his life, shared her plans for planting a garden come spring, and let him into her life in ways that felt like the greatest gift he'd ever received. They worked together to transform the cabin from a barely habitable shack into a real home. They built a chicken coop, and Tessa bought laying hens. They expanded the garden plot and reinforced the fences. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future, and slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It happened in small moments, the way Tessa laughed at his terrible jokes, the way Xander could make her smile even when she was tired from hard work. The comfortable silence that fell between them sometimes, peaceful rather than awkward. The way her hand felt in his when they walked by the creek in the evening. The way his heart beat faster when he crested the rise and saw her cabin in the distance. By October, when the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold and the air carried the first hints of coming winter, Xander knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Tessa Abbott. But he also knew she valued her independence, had fought hard for the right to make her own way in the world. So, he waited, letting their relationship deepen naturally, content to court her at a pace that felt right for both of them. It was Tessa who finally forced the issue. On a cool Sunday in late October, after they had finished repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by cattle from a neighboring property, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Xander, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What are we doing? You and me, I mean." His heart hammered in his chest. "What do you want us to be doing?" "That's not an answer." "No, I suppose it's not." He set down his tools and faced her fully. "All right then. The truth is I'm courting you, Tessa. Have been for months now. I ride over here every chance I get because I can't stand being away from you. I think about you every day when I'm at the ranch. I want to know about your day, your thoughts, your dreams. I want to be part of your life, and I want you to be part of mine. For how long? For as long as you'll have me, forever, if you're willing." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "Forever is a long time. I know, and I know we haven't known each other that long. Just a few months, really. But some things you just know. Tessa, I know that I love you. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I know that when I think about the future, you're in every part of it. I love you too," she said softly. "I think I have since you promised to come check on me, back when you were being loaded into that wagon. No one had ever looked at me the way you did then. Like I mattered. Like I was someone worth coming back for. You are worth coming back for. You're worth everything." She stepped close to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could count the freckles across her nose. "Then ask me properly, Xander Kincaid. Ask me what you've been wanting to ask for weeks now." He took both her hands in his, feeling how small they were despite their strength, how perfectly they fit in his own. "Tessa Abbott, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and working beside you and building a future together?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Xander, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, his first real kiss, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. She tasted like sunshine and coffee and promise, and when they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. "I don't have a ring yet," Xander admitted. "I wanted to wait until I was sure you'd say yes before I spent the money. I don't need a ring, I just need you." But then she paused, a practical look crossing her face. "Though we should probably talk about the details. Where will we live? What about your work at the ranch?" "I've been thinking about that. I have some money saved, and Harrison mentioned he might be willing to sell me some breeding stock. I could start my own small operation here. Use your land. We'd have to build it up slow, but between your property and my experience, we could make it work." "You'd leave the Triple Star? Give up steady wages?" "I'd give up a lot more than that for you, Tessa. Besides, it wouldn't be giving up. It would be starting something new, something of our own." He squeezed her hands. "But only if that's what you want. I'll do whatever makes sense for us. I want us to build something together." "Ah," she said firmly. "That's what I've wanted since my father died. Not just survival, but a real life, a real home. And I want to build it with you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Empire City, with Harrison and his wife standing as witnesses and half the town attending out of curiosity about the woman who'd homesteaded alone, and the cowboy who'd convinced her to marry him. Tessa wore a simple dress of deep blue that she'd sewn herself, and Xander wore his best clothes, pressed and neat. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander felt like something fundamental had shifted in the universe, like his life had finally clicked into place after years of wandering. The wedding celebration was held at the cabin, with neighbors and new friends bringing food and drink. Harrison arrived with a wagon full of supplies, his wedding gift to the couple, including lumber for expanding the cabin and tools for starting their ranching operation. Mrs. Morris from the homestead brought preserves and vegetables from her root cellar. Even Patterson from the general store came, presenting them with a set of good china plates that Tessa accepted with tears in her eyes. "For the family you'll build," Patterson said simply. "Every home needs good plates." As the sun set and the guests gradually departed, Xander and Tessa stood together in the yard they'd worked so hard to clear and improve. The cabin looked warm and welcoming, with lamplight glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Their cabin now. Their home. "Happy, Mrs. Kincaid?" Xander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She leaned back against him, fitting perfectly into his embrace. "When my father died, I thought the best I could hope for was survival, making it through each day. I never imagined I'd find this, find you. I never imagined I'd find a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots and build a real life." He turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "You gave me that, Tessa. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," she corrected, then pulled him toward the cabin. "Now come inside, husband. We have a lifetime to start living." The first winter of their marriage tested them in ways neither had fully anticipated. Snow came heavy in December, blanketing the high desert in white and making the ride to Empire City treacherous. They spent long evenings by the fire, Xander working on tack and equipment, while Tessa sewed or read aloud from books they'd borrowed from the tiny town library. They learned the rhythms of married life, how to share small spaces, how to work through disagreements, how to support each other through difficult days. In January, true to his word, Harrison sold Xander 6 head of cattle at a fair price, along with a young bull. It was a start, a foundation they could build on. Xander used his savings to build a small barn and improve the fencing on Tessa's property, preparing for spring when they could expand their herd. The work was hard and the hours long, but he'd never been happier. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Tessa discovered she was pregnant in March, and the news filled them both with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were still establishing themselves, still learning how to run their small operation. Was it too soon for a baby? But watching Tessa's face as she told him the news, seeing the hope and wonder there, Xander knew that, ready or not, they'd make it work. "We're going to be parents," Tessa said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Can you believe it?" "With you, I can believe anything." He pulled her close, careful and gentle. "We'll figure it out together, just like we figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Tessa continued working as long as she could, tending the garden and the chickens, helping with the lighter ranch chores. Xander found himself becoming increasingly protective, wanting to wrap her in cotton and keep her safe, but Tessa would have none of it. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she said tartly when he tried to take over all the heavy lifting. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Xander. I can still work." "I know you can. I just worry." "Well, worry less and help me with this fence post. The chickens got out again yesterday." Their herd grew slowly but steadily. Xander took odd jobs around Empire City when ranch work was slow, building his reputation as a reliable hand who did quality work. Tessa sold eggs and vegetables in town, her garden producing abundantly in the rich soil near the creek. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were making it work, building something solid and lasting. In early November, as the cottonwoods dropped their golden leaves and the air turned crisp, Tessa went into labor. Mrs. Morris came to help, along with a midwife from Empire City named Rose Jenkins, who had a reputation for bringing half the babies in the county into the world safely. Xander was banished to the barn, where he paced and worried for 16 hours until Morris finally came to get him. "You have a son," Morris said with a tired smile. "A healthy boy with good lungs, and your wife is fine. Tired, but fine." Xander rushed inside to find Tessa propped up in their bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket she'd knitted during the long winter months. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was radiant despite her obvious fatigue. "Come meet your son," she said softly. The baby was impossibly small, with a red face and eyes squeezed shut against the lamplight. But he was perfect, from his tiny fingers to the dark fuzz of hair on his head. Xander sat carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid to breathe too hard for fear of disturbing the miracle in Tessa's arms. "What should we name him?" he asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "I was thinking we could name him Samuel, after my father." Tessa looked up at him. "If that's all right with you, Samuel Kincaid." "Samuel is perfect." Xander touched one tiny hand, marveling when the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his finger. "Welcome to the world, Samuel. We're going to do our best by you, son. I promise you that." Parenthood transformed their lives in ways both challenging and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still required constant attention. Tessa nursed him while sitting at the kitchen table doing accounts. Xander rocked him to sleep in a cradle he'd built from cottonwood wood, singing old cowboy songs in a soft voice. They took turns walking the floor with him during the night when he fussed, supporting each other through the exhaustion. "I don't know how my mother did this alone after my father died," Tessa said one night after a particularly difficult evening when Samuel had been fussy and colicky. "I have you to help, and I still feel overwhelmed sometimes." She did it because she had to, just like you did after your father died. People find strength they didn't know they had when there's no other choice. Xander adjusted the blanket around Samuel, who had finally fallen asleep in his arms. "But you don't have to do this alone. We're partners in everything, Tessa. The ranch, the house, raising our son, all of it." As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, their ranch grew too. By his second birthday, their herd had expanded to 20 head of cattle, and they'd added 2 horses beyond Tessa's original mare. Xander had built a proper barn and a second room onto the cabin, giving them space for Samuel and for the second baby that was on the way. Life was busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was good. It was theirs. Their daughter arrived in the spring of Samuel's 3rd year, an easier birth than the first had been. They named her Charlotte, after Xander's mother, and she came into the world with less fanfare, but no less love than her brother. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to changing her clothes. "Gentle, Sam," Xander reminded his son as the boy stroked Charlotte's dark hair with pudgy fingers. "She's very small still." "I'm being gentle, Papa. See? She likes me." And Charlotte did seem to like her big brother, calming when he talked to her in his high, childish voice. Watching his children together, Xander felt a contentment so profound it sometimes frightened him. He'd gone from a drifting cowboy with no family and no real home to a man with a wife he loved, 2 beautiful children, and a ranch that was slowly but surely becoming profitable. Sometimes he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking about?" Tessa asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching Samuel play in the yard while Charlotte slept in her cradle. It was early summer, the air warm but not yet oppressive, the sky turning shades of pink and gold as the sun set. About how different my life is from what I expected, how much better. Better than being a drifting cowboy? She smiled, but there was genuine curiosity in her question. So much better I can't even put it into words. That day I got thrown from my horse and landed on that fence post. I thought I was dying. Thought that was it, my story over before I'd really lived. But instead, I found you, and you gave me a reason to live. You became my reason for everything. Tessa reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. You know it works both ways, don't you? I was so lost after my father died, so alone. I had the land and the cabin, and I was determined to make it work, but I didn't have joy. I didn't have hope beyond just surviving. You gave me that. You gave me a partner, a family, a real life instead of just existence. We saved each other then. I suppose we did. She squeezed his hand. And we'll keep saving each other, every day for the rest of our lives. The years flowed past like water in Willow Creek, steady and sure. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning ranch work at his father's side. Charlotte proved to have her mother's practical nature and her father's way with animals. 2 more children followed, a son they named Daniel and another daughter they called Rose. The cabin expanded again, becoming a true ranch house with 4 bedrooms and a parlor that Tessa filled with furniture Xander built during winter months. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They never became wealthy by big city standards, but they built something solid and lasting. The Kincaid Ranch became known in Empire City as a source of quality cattle and horses. Xander's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher grew, and he found himself occasionally giving advice to other homesteaders trying to establish themselves in the harsh but beautiful Nevada landscape. Through it all, through the hard times and the good times, through droughts and cold winters and the everyday challenges of raising a family and running a ranch, Xander and Tessa's love deepened and strengthened. They still worked side by side the way they had in those early days, still talked long into the night about their dreams and plans, still found reasons to smile at each other across a crowded dinner table full of children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Tessa back to the place where they'd first met, the spot by the creek where she'd been hanging laundry and he'd collapsed half dead from blood loss. It looked different now, the cottonwoods taller, the creek path worn smooth from years of use. But the memories were just as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. I remember seeing you and thinking I must be hallucinating, Xander said, his arm around Tessa's waist as they stood in the shade of the cottonwoods. An angel hanging laundry. That's what my blood-starved brain decided you were. I remember thinking you looked like trouble, Tessa admitted with a laugh. A half-dead cowboy was not in my plans for that day. The best things in life never are planned, are they? They just happen, if you're lucky and paying attention. Well, I'm glad I paid attention that day. Glad I didn't just leave you lying there and continue with my laundry. That would have been bad for me. Very bad. She turned in his arms to face him fully. These have been the best 10 years of my life, Xander. Every single day with you and our children, building our ranch, making a life together. I wouldn't change any of it. Not even the hard parts, the droughts and the lean winters and Daniel's bout with pneumonia. Not even those, because we faced them together, and that made all the difference. She touched his face gently. You kept your promise, you know. From that first day when you said you'd find me in Empire City. You kept every promise you ever made to me. I always will, he said solemnly. For the rest of my life, Tessa. I'll keep loving you, working beside you, being grateful every single day that you found me bleeding on that range and became my reason to live. They kissed there in the shade of the cottonwoods, 10 years married and still as much in love as they had been on their wedding day. Around them, the Nevada landscape stretched vast and beautiful, the same land where a dying cowboy had found salvation in the form of a brave woman with gentle hands and a strong heart. The ranch continued to thrive as the years passed. Samuel, at 18, proved to be a natural rancher with an eye for quality stock and a gift for training horses. He'd inherited his mother's practical nature and his father's steady temperament, becoming the kind of young man that parents could be proud of. Charlotte, at 15, divided her time between helping her mother with the household and working with her father on the ranch books, showing an aptitude for numbers that surprised everyone. Daniel, at 12, was the wild one, always looking for adventure and frequently getting into scrapes that required rescuing. And Rose, just 8, followed her oldest brother everywhere, determined to learn everything about ranch life despite her small size. Watching his children grow and thrive, seeing them become capable, good-hearted people, filled Xander with a pride that sometimes threatened to overflow. Harrison from the Triple Star, now well into his 70s, occasionally rode over to visit, pleased to see how the young cowboy he had once employed had built a life and a ranch that rivaled many operations twice its size. "You've done well, Xander," he said one afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel work with a young horse in the corral. "Better than I expected, and I expected quite a bit from you." "I had a lot of help," Xander said, nodding toward Tessa, who was in the garden with Rose. "Couldn't have done any of it without her. That's the truth of a good marriage right there. The right partner makes everything possible. The wrong one makes everything hard." Harrison sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You chose well when you chose to court that young lady. Or maybe she chose you. Either way, it worked out. She saved my life twice, really. Once when she found me bleeding, and once when she agreed to marry me." As the sun began to set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, the entire Kincaid family gathered on the porch for supper, a tradition Tessa had started when the children were small and had stubbornly maintained as they grew. It was a time to be together, to share the events of the day, to simply enjoy each other's company. "Papa, tell us again how you and Mama met," Rose asked, as she did regularly, despite having heard the story dozens of times. Xander exchanged a smile with Tessa. "Well, I was riding fence line for the Triple Star Ranch when my horse spooked at a rattlesnake, threw me right onto a broken fence post, which went clean through my side. I pulled myself off and started walking, bleeding like a stuck pig, certain I was going to die right there in the Nevada desert." "And then Mama found you," Rose said, her eyes wide, even though she knew every word of the story. "Then your Mama found me," Xander confirmed. "She was hanging laundry by the creek, and I thought she was an angel. Turns out I was right about that part. She dragged me to her wagon, stitched me up, and probably saved my life." "And then they fell in love," Charlotte added with the slightly cynical tone that teenagers perfected. "Because getting stabbed by a fence post is apparently romantic." "The fence post wasn't romantic," Tessa said dryly. "But the man I found bleeding was. Even half dead, he had the courtesy to thank me and the strength to survive. That's what impressed me. That and his rugged good looks," Xander added, making the children laugh and Tessa roll her eyes. "Your father was a mess when I found him, covered in blood and dust, barely conscious. Rugged good looks were the last thing on my mind." "But later," Daniel prompted with a grin. "Later I noticed," Tessa admitted, reaching over to take Xander's hand. "Later, I noticed quite a bit." As the children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' affection, Xander looked around at the family they had built, the home they'd created, the life they'd carved out of hard work and determination and love. 20 years had passed since that day by the creek when Tessa had found him bleeding and everything had changed. 20 years of joy and struggle, of growth and challenges, of building something meaningful and lasting. The ranch now sprawled across 200 acres, their original property expanded through careful purchases over the years. The herd numbered over 100 head, with horses that were sought after throughout the territory. The cabin had become a substantial house, comfortable and welcoming. Their children were growing into the kind of people who would carry the Kincaid legacy forward into the next generation. But more than the material success, more than the land and the cattle and the house, what filled Xander with gratitude was the love that had sustained them through everything. The love that had started with a desperate cowboy and a brave woman with gentle hands, and had grown into something that encompassed 4 children and a lifetime of shared experiences. "I love you," he murmured to Tessa later that night after the children had gone to bed and they sat together on the porch swing he'd built for her last birthday. "After 20 years, I love you more than I did on our wedding day." "I love you too," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I hadn't looked up that day, if I hadn't seen you collapse. I'd probably still be here, still running this place, but I'd be alone, and lonely. You gave me everything I didn't even know I wanted." "We gave each other everything," Xander corrected, echoing words they'd said to each other many times over the years. "That's what real love is, isn't it? 2 people making each other's lives better just by being in them." "That's exactly what it is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the cattle lowed softly in their pasture, the sounds of their ranch, their home, their life. Years continued their steady march forward. Samuel married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Ellen, who fit into the family as if she'd always been there. They built a small house on the far edge of the property, and Samuel took on more responsibility for the ranch operations, allowing Xander to finally slow down a bit, though he never fully retired. Cowboys didn't retire, they just worked a little less hard as the years caught up with them. Charlotte surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Empire City. She lived in town during the week, but came home every weekend, bringing stories of her students and the satisfaction that came from helping children learn. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years working various ranches and even prospecting for a while before coming home at 25, ready to settle down and help Samuel run the ranch. And Rose, their youngest, showed every sign of following in her parents' footsteps, marrying at 19 and starting a family of her own. The day Samuel and Ellen's first child was born, making Xander and Tessa grandparents for the first time, felt like completing a circle that had started 25 years earlier beside that creek. They stood together in Samuel's house, looking down at the tiny baby girl with wonder. "We're grandparents," Tessa said, a note of amazement in her voice. "How did we get old enough to be grandparents?" "We didn't get old," Xander said, putting his arm around her. "We just got lucky enough to live long enough to see our children have children of their own." More grandchildren followed over the years. Charlotte eventually married a shopkeeper from Empire City and had 3 children. Daniel married one of the Morris girls from the homestead that had helped send word to the Triple Star all those years ago, and they had twin boys who were as wild as their father had been. Rose and her husband settled on a neighboring property and had 4 children in quick succession, keeping everyone busy. Through it all, through the joy of watching their family grow and the inevitable sorrows that came with life, through the challenges of aging bodies and the satisfaction of seeing their hard work bear fruit, Xander and Tessa remained the center of the family they had created. Their love, tested by time and trial, had only grown stronger. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The main house was filled to bursting with family, friends, neighbors, and people from Empire City who'd known the Kincaids for decades. Harrison had passed away 5 years earlier, but his daughter came, representing the Triple Star Ranch and bringing news that the current owners still told the story of the cowboy who'd gotten injured riding the range and the woman who'd saved him. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Xander and Tessa found themselves alone on the porch once more, the place where they'd spent countless evenings over the years. They were both in their 60s now, hair gray and faces lined, but when Xander looked at Tessa, he still saw the young woman hanging laundry by the creek, the one who'd looked at a dying cowboy and refused to let him die. 40 years, Tessa said wonderingly. "How did we make it look so easy?" "It wasn't easy," Xander said. "There were hard times, lean years, moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it through, but it was worth it. Every single day was worth it." "Do you ever think about what might have happened if your horse hadn't thrown you that day? If you'd never gotten injured, never collapsed near my camp?" "Sometimes. And then I stop thinking about it because it's too terrible to imagine. A life without you, without our children and grandchildren, without all of this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them, illuminated by moonlight. "This is the life I was always meant to live. I just had to almost die to find it." "You were always meant to find me," Tessa said firmly, "and I was always meant to find you. I believe that with everything in me. We were meant to save each other, meant to build this life together. I love you, Tessa Kincaid. I've loved you for 40 years, and I'll love you for 40 more if the good Lord grants us that time. I love you too, Xander, today, tomorrow, and forever." The years that followed were gentler, slower. Xander and Tessa passed the primary responsibility for the ranch to Samuel and Daniel, content to advise rather than direct, to support rather than lead. They spent their time with their grandchildren, teaching them about ranching and life and the importance of family. They took walks by Willow Creek, visited friends in Empire City, and simply enjoyed the peace that came with a life well lived. When Xander turned 70, the whole family gathered again, and he found himself surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Looking at all the faces around him, at the family that had grown from that chance meeting 45 years earlier, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. That evening, after everyone had left and he was alone with Tessa, he said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About how every good thing in my life came from that day you found me bleeding. Our marriage, our children, this ranch, all of it. I spent years as a drifting cowboy, going from place to place with no roots and no real purpose. And then, one rattlesnake and one fence post changed everything." "It wasn't the snake or the fence post that changed everything," Tessa corrected gently. "It was the choices we made after. I chose to help you instead of leaving you. You chose to come check on me instead of just forgetting about the woman who'd patched you up. We chose to fall in love, to get married, to build this life together. None of it was chance, Xander. It was choice." "You're right." He pulled her close, marveling that even after all these years, holding her still felt like coming home. "And I'd make the same choices all over again. Every single one of them. Even the choice to get thrown from your horse? Even that? Because it brought me to you, and you became my reason to live. Not just to survive that injury, but to really live. To build a life worth living, a family worth cherishing, a legacy worth leaving behind." They sat together as the stars emerged and the night settled around them, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance meeting. The ranch was quiet now, the children and grandchildren gone to their own homes, but the love that had started it all remained as strong as ever. Xander and Tessa Kincaid lived long lives filled with love, family, and purpose. They saw their grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and watched the ranch they'd built together thrive under the capable hands of the next generation. When their time finally came, many years after that fateful day by Willow Creek, they died within months of each other, their love story complete. The Kincaid Ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations as a testament to what two people could build when they chose love, commitment, and hard work. And the story of how it all began, how a cowboy got injured riding the range and a brave woman found him bleeding and became his reason to live, was told and retold through the years, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the most unexpected moments. In Empire City, where old-timers gathered to share tales of the early days, the story of Xander and Tessa Kincaid became legend. Young couples heard it and hoped for a love that strong. Families pointed to the thriving Kincaid Ranch as proof that with determination and partnership, anything was possible. And on quiet evenings, if you walked past the old homestead by Willow Creek where it all began, you could almost hear the echo of two voices promising to love each other today, tomorrow, and forever.